Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's go ahead and pray and then we'll get started with Daniel chapter 1, part 1? No, that's not it. That's part 2. Oh, well, there we go. All right, let's go ahead and pray and then we'll start here. Lord, thank you so much just for this opportunity we have. Thank you for just your information and your grace given to us. Pray, God, that this would be informative and instructive and that you would be glorified. Thank you again so much for who you are and for what you do. For it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about or just review a little bit of what we talked about last week. So we started off going through, again, just 7 verses of chapter 1. And we had started off with Jehoiakim's reign, which occurred in 608 BC. And we find that in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's reign, which is 605 BC, respectively, Nebuchadnezzar invades Judah. This was important, an important time marker, right, as it marks essentially the prophetic fulfillment of this particular event, this historical event that took place. Okay. King Nebuchadnezzar invades Judah, and Jerusalem takes Jehoiakim and Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to Babylon. Okay. It is estimated that Daniel is possibly around 16 years of age at this time and enters again into training to become subject of the king's court of Nebuchadnezzar. Just going through, there's a lot of history here in these first 7 verses of Daniel. For one, it establishes that Judah has been conquered, and 2 actions underscore this activity. 1, the taking of the effects of the temple of God and changing the name of the Jews, that is, Daniel and his companions, to reflect the false gods of Babylon. We read so far that out of all the people who were chosen to stand in the service of the king, there are probably many others, but for the sake of the historical narrative, these 4 are mentioned. We also see the specific periods of time or specifics of the historical account of Daniel. We don't want to skip over this, right? It's more than just prophecy, but we find that there's history within this too. We have the specific time period, the specific tribe, a specific area that has been invaded, Jerusalem, specific kings that are mentioned here, the activity specifically of Nebuchadnezzar and what he did with the effects and the 4 individuals. The specific servant that is the servant that Nebuchadnezzar asked to gather those 3 specific groups and train them. We have the noblemen, family, sons, and Jews, the specific groups themselves, the characteristics of what they were supposed to have to qualify to be a part of this court, specific orders and times from the king, a period of 3 years they were to train. We see the names of the specific Jewish young men. We see the specific and the specific name change of these individuals. That brings us up to speed in verse 8 of chapter 1. Let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll make a couple of observations here. It says, "But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself." Again, if you recall, this connects back to the information given in verse 5 of Daniel's account. This is also very important of historical narrative as well, particularly in Hebrew historical accounts, that you get to a certain period of time and then we kind of rewind the clock back and fill in gaps, right, of things that happen. In verse 5 of this chapter 1, we read the following: that the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank. So at the very start of their training, these individuals got food that the king would drink also and eat. Okay. Now, in our particular culture, we've taken this particular verse and many others like it, and we have kind of concocted a particular practice. Remember, this is just historical narrative. There's nothing practical about this, but yet we have taken verses seemingly out of context and have made them practical for our use. For example, we have two examples here. One of them, I'm sure you've recognized these, okay? The Daniel fast. See, 1 Daniel 1:8, Daniel made up his mind. I have no idea what that has to do with the fast here, okay? A complete resource of guidelines, menus, recipes, and spiritual journals, as if Daniel decided that he was going to make a meal plan. The Daniel plan consists of low glycemic fruit. I don't remember fruit being mentioned here in this text. Water or herbal teas. Did you know that that Daniel was into Earl Grey? Did you know that? Lean proteins and non-starchy vegetables. That is the Daniel plan, right? So if you do this, apparently you are doing what Daniel did. The Daniel fast is a little different. You see what's not allowed on the Daniel fast here are refined grains, fried foods, as if that existed in Daniel's time, maybe. But what's allowed on the Daniel fast is whole grains, vegetables, and of course, nuts. Okay. Is this really what this is about? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these verses here, and some of the words here. Made up. Daniel made up his mind. This Hebrew word assume. This word occurs 586 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 5 times in the book of Daniel. This word is written in the qual stem. It is active, right? So Daniel is doing the activity himself, and this word can be translated to set. So he kind of focused, right? He set his mind. This word again speaks of the intentionality with this stem. Daniel was very intentional about his actions and activity. So this wasn't just a happenstance thing that Daniel did. He sat down and he thought about this, and he had made up his mind. He said, I'm not going to engage in this choice food here that the king has offered. The word for mind, the Hebrew word for mind, is the word leb. Now, we've talked about this in Ecclesiastes. This word is found all throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Sometimes it is translated heart. Sometimes it's translated mind, depending on the context. From a Hebrew understanding, this is the location of thought and understanding. So once more, this speaks to the purposeful thought and understanding of Daniel. Daniel sought to make up his mind on purpose. Okay? But make up his mind about what? Well, if we read forward here, that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food. The word defile in this context is the Hebrew word ga'al. Ga'al. It only occurs 11 times, okay, in the Hebrew scriptures and twice in Daniel. It is translated in with various words, polluted, defiled, or stained. Something that is either polluted, something that is stained, right? Think of like a wine spill on a dress or something like that, or defiled. This word is in the hippa'el, which is reflexive, so that he wouldn't defile himself. That is what the translation says here. So that he wouldn't stain himself, he wouldn't defile himself. What does this mean here? This carries with it that Daniel would not make himself unclean. Now, how would he be unclean if he's just eating food? That doesn't really make any sense, right? Particularly choice food. Pathbag is the Hebrew word here. 8 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures. It only occurs within the book of Daniel, chapters 1 and 11, respectively. Nowhere else. Now, this word is translated choice food, which you would think it's like kind of a smorgasbord of things, but actually it could be translated as choice meats or provision of meats, right? So it's not just, there was a whole bunch of things on the table, and Daniel could pick from. We're talking about meats, choice cuts here. Choice cuts as in relation to the culture of Babylon, but maybe not so much the culture of Israel. So why is this an issue for Daniel? Well, if you remember or recall in the law of Moses, particularly the book of Leviticus, you would find that certain types of meat, they were prohibited from eating. These were the animals that were unclean to eat for the Israelites. I'll just go through these real quickly. This is found in Leviticus chapter 11, by the way. For instance, camel's meat, they were prohibited, they're prohibited from eating. Rock badgers, rabbits, pigs or sows, they were prohibited from eating those particular animals as well. Water life or fishes that don't have scales or fins, they were prohibited from eating that as well. Winged scavengers like vultures and things like that, they were prohibited from eating. Winged insects like locusts and stuff like that, they could not eat. And pawed animals like dogs and lions and things like that, they were prohibited from eating those. And different types of reptiles and lizards. Now, the prohibitions given to Israel, all the other surrounding nations did not have. They did not have these prohibitions. They could eat birds and lions and camel's meat and all of these things, right? They can do all that. Okay. So the reason why Daniel intentionally did not eat of the king's choice meats was more likely because Daniel's actions were intentionally being informed by the law of Moses. He still considered, even though they were not dwelling in the land, Daniel thought it was important to follow and abide by this certain stipulation. This would result in making Daniel and his companions distinctive amongst all the others, which is exactly what the law of Moses was meant for. It was meant to make them unique, right? Distinctive amongst all the nations. It would appear that Daniel's actions would make him and his companions distinct. In verse 8, continuing on, so he drank, or he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he would not defile himself. This is really kind of interesting, and this talks about Daniel's character. That Daniel, he looked for the chief of the officials, right? Or the eunuchs, right, to request that he would not defile himself with the meats and the wines that were provided for him. He actually asked permission for this. It's not like he went, no, I'm not eating that, so you can pass that along somewhere else. Oh, he mentioned, is this it? May we be excused from this? That's the idea. It is worth noting that Daniel did not cause a stir. He wasn't there to cause a problem to the commander of the eunuchs of the king. He just simply went to request not to engage in the king's choice meats. I find that to be very fascinating, considering that, Daniel's taking somewhat of a risk here. Okay? We see some of the responses of the commander of the chief or of the eunuchs in verse 9 of chapter 1. It says, "Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials." Okay? Let's take a look at a couple of words here. The word favor in this particular text is the word chesed. Again, fascinating word. This word occurs 251 times in the Hebrew scriptures, twice in the book of Daniel. It's usually translated loving kindness. When it's used of God, it's translated this way. It's also translated goodness and mercy. Okay? Again, whenever this word is used of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it is associated with his gracious nature, that he's kind and gracious to the object, which is humanity or man or whoever he is dealing with at the time when this is used, the nation of Israel, things like that. But this is not used of God in this context. This is used of the official. So this could be translated favor, right? Things like that. Again, in the context of human beings, this discusses the disposition of the commander of Dan towards Daniel. So Daniel seems to kind of have some favor. He's in with the chief of the officials here. Another word that's used in this text in verse 9 is the word compassion. Rachem is the word here in the Hebrew. It occurs 45 times in the text and 3 times in the book of Daniel. This word is also used of females within the context of conception when it's talking about their womb, or it's used to refer to a person who has compassion on another. Okay? In the context of this verse, it would appear that this underscores again the predisposition of the kindness and the pleasant state that the commander of the eunuchs had toward Daniel's request. This chief of those who served Daniel and his companions really took his request seriously. He really tried to figure out what he could do here. In verse 10, we find that the answer of the commander of the officials and his concern. Verse 10, "And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king." So we see the commander makes an admission. So I would love to grant your request, Daniel. I don't think that this is a problem. However, the challenge is the king has given me these orders to give you this food. And if you reject this and you come looking all sickly, then my head's on the chopping block, like literally, right? If the commander does not give this to them, that is the food and drink that he's appointed for them, and they appear sad looking, literally skinny, malnourished, right? Famished, things like that, then King Nebuchadnezzar would have the chief official executed for disobeying the king's orders. Okay. Let us continue here, Daniel and his response to the chief of officials in verses 11 and 13. "But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink." There you go, that old Daniel plan, right? Then let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Now, what's interesting is the word observe and see in this text are the same word. We're familiar with this word. This word in Hebrew is ra'ah. Do you remember this word, right? It doesn't mean a person just looking at something, but looking at something and examining the quality of the particular thing, right? So Daniel says, look, if you're so concerned about this, how about this? How about we do this? Test your servants for 10 days, okay? Just give us 10. Right? And let us just get some vegetables to eat and some water, right? And if we look more sickly than these people here, then we'll go ahead and eat the king's choice food. Okay. Ra'ah, this word occurs 1,314 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 22 times in the book of Daniel. It is translated to see or observe. Again, the first time that this word is used in Daniel is the commander's concern about Daniel and his companions' physical appearance, the way they look. Observe and examine how we look. Do we look sickly after 10 days? If we do, then we'll go with your meals. Now, what's interesting is there's kind of an interesting statement here. I think it comes across in the translation of the text, but I like to bring this out. In chapter 1, verse 13 of Daniel, the word translated observed is in the jussive type. You remember the jussive type? Well, maybe you don't, but if you don't, then I'm going to remind you. What is the jussive type? We saw this all throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. This Hebrew language, the way that this word is written, ra'ah, in the jussive type, emphasizes indirect commands that another person is giving to another. So the jussive doesn't carry the full weight of an imperative, nor is it's stronger than a suggestion. Okay. How about this? How about we try this? This is a request of Daniel. Again, this speaks to the character and the nature of how he approaches things. Daniel is not commanding the commander that he should do this, but that he's offering a suggestion or a request to address the commander's concern about Daniel's request. Again, Daniel he's not trying to rabble rouse here. He's being very intentional about the statements he uses and the words he uses. Once more, this underscores Daniel's intent not to see anyone hurt or punished by his actions, but to seek a solution to both his problem and the chief's concern. Okay? He's very accommodating. Verses 14 to 15. Let's continue here. So he listened to them in this matter and examined them or tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better. Now, I have to add this. If the Daniel plan was actually the Daniel plan, then they should do this for 10 days, right? Not like a year. That's not the Daniel plan, right? And we have another problem too. The Daniel plan is usually implemented to lose weight. But what's the conclusion of this? That their appearance seemed better and they were fatter. Fatter? Oh, okay. Then all the youths who had been eating the king's choice foods. It says the commander considered Daniel's suggestion and examined them over 10 days. Okay? At the conclusion of the 10 days, their physical form was good. tov is the Hebrew word here. The quality of how they looked was good. They were healthy. And they were fatter. Now, I don't think that that's the objective of the Daniel plan, to gain weight. Or the Daniel fast, to gain weight. Usually when you fast, you lose weight. That's kind of the idea. But they got fatter. What is this word here? This Hebrew word is bari. 13 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures. It only appears one time here in the book of Daniel. Okay. It is translated fat, fatter, or fat flesh. That still doesn't clear anything up here, right? What does this mean? I'm convinced, based upon this word, this is an alternative word for healthy. They were of good health. They didn't look malnourished. They didn't look malnutritious. They didn't look sickly. They didn't look skinny. Okay. They were healthy. This word is used to express how they looked physically. Okay, so it's not like they were walking around like Jabba the Hutt. That's not what was going on. You know, it's not like after they did the Daniel plan, they needed to exercise afterwards. That's not what's going on here. It's that they were healthy. You know. And so, with that, we find in verse 16, the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and wine and kept giving them vegetables. As long as my head doesn't get on the chopping block, we're cool with this, right? Give them some more broccoli, right? The commander persisted in carrying away the choice meats and giving them vegetables and water per their requests, because they looked healthy with this food. This is not a meal plan. Okay, that's not what this is about. I mean, the word fast doesn't even appear in this text. Okay, so it's not a fast. Okay, it is just something that they're doing to regard the law of Moses within the land that they live in. Okay. Verse 17. As for these four youths, God gave them knowledge, intelligence in every branch of literature, and wisdom. And Daniel even understood all kinds of dreams and visions. There are three things to note, I believe, in this particular statement that Daniel makes here. First, God granted them the ability to know the knowledge and information of the Babylonians. These words here, Madah and Sakal and Chokmah, knowledge, wisdom, literature, and intelligence, are all found in Daniel chapter 1, verse 4. Okay? Let's go back and look at that. Again, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom there was no defect, who were not good looking, but they were healthy. Okay? Showing intelligence, sakal, in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had the ability for serving in the king's court, and he ordered them to teach the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Okay, so they were what do you call them? Your AP kids, right? They were very intelligent and learned very quickly these things. The language of the Babylonians, the history, the culture, things like that. Oh yeah, you know what? We'll skip this because this is about the Daniel fast. I was on a little rant when I was studying this. We'll skip it. If you have the notes, you already mentioned all this. right? The nation of Israel was brought into captivity by the hand of God, right, into Babylon. The Hebrew word sum, which is translated fast, doesn't even appear in this text, right? So it can't be a Daniel fast. It can't be a Daniel plan. Recall that the historical account that Daniel records has more to do with God preserving a future and a hope for Israel to bring them back into their land than it does with Daniel. I mean, why are we creating meal plans after this? I mean, it's ridiculous. Jeremiah 29, verses 10 and 11. I want to turn there right quick and look at this. We usually quote the last half of it, but we don't quote the first half, which is fascinating because this goes together. Jeremiah 29, verses 10 and 11. Again, note the context here. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you all and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place, that is Israel, the land. For I know the plans that I have for you. How many times have you heard that? If I had $1 for every time I heard that, I wouldn't be doing this, right? For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. The general context here is that they're going to be sent into Babylon, but they will not be forgotten in Babylon. God will bring them back from Babylon to Israel. Okay? So this has everything to do, the account of Daniel and them being in Babylon has everything to do with God fulfilling what he told them would happen to them and how he would preserve them in Babylon. Okay? It's not about a diet plan. Man, I'm moving on here because it's making me crazy. Verse 17 of Daniel. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. This brings us to the second point here. Daniel had an understanding of the mind of God through the means of visions and dreams. Very quickly, the word visions is the word chazon. 35 times it occurs in the Hebrew scriptures. This word appears 12 times in the book of Daniel. Did you know that's more than any other book in the Hebrew scriptures? 12 times this word occurs, visions. The Hebrew root word, chazon, comes from the word chazah, meaning to see or to look or behold. It catches your attention. That's kind of the idea. This word is used here. The word used here are various things that Daniel ought to pay attention to or focus on. So he had things that caught his attention, things that were unusual, that were out of the norm, that were supernatural. Okay, and as we see that all throughout the book of Daniel here, the word dreams is kalom. This word occurs 64 times in the Hebrew scriptures, 5 times in the book of Daniel. And again, this word speaks of the communication. Now, it's also used of having regular dreams as well. So it's not just used exclusively for when God gives dreams to individuals. But within the context of God doing this, this is one of the means that he uses. He uses the dreams of others. For instance, Nebuchadnezzar, which we're coming up real fast in chapter 2, right? God used dreams to communicate to Nebuchadnezzar. So if we were kind of to look at this from a broad scope here, we have the outline of prophecy just overall. And the two branches is visions and dreams. Okay. We see visions that are given to Daniel, and messages that are given to him in the explanation of that. And we see dreams, particularly given to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? This makes up the whole of the prophecy in the book of Daniel. So prophecy again refers to the what it is, and then the visions and dreams refer to the categories or the means by which these things are accomplished. Okay. By the way, this verse in chapter 1 underscores that the book of Daniel was more than likely written later, not earlier, because he would have not known this before he arrived in Babylon. So it's not that he's kind of writing this as he goes. This is kind of towards the end of his life when all of these events have taken place, right? And he's kind of marking this down. Okay. Verses 18 to 19 says, "Then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them. And out of all of them, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service." The king talked with them. He sat down and said, "Tell me a little bit about yourself." No, I don't think that's what's going on here. The historical account detailed at the conclusion of their training, they were presented for the king, and the king talked with them. I would say the word is examined. He wanted to know what they knew. 3 years we invested into you. Let's talk. What do you know? Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Tell me about the culture. Tell me about this. Tell me about this God. Tell me about that God. Tell me about this guy. Right? He was examining them. And the men who were selected to serve on this court, among them were Daniel and his companions. And it would appear that he was extremely impressed with them because of the knowledge that they knew and the things that they were able to remember and recall. Okay? And with this, they were prepared to serve the king. They entered into his personal service as a result of their knowledge. Verse 20, "As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in his realm." This statement is important for a couple of reasons. One, this explains how Daniel rose to the prominence that he had within Babylon itself. This is the reason why. Okay. And among all of the diviners, they were literally 10 hands or 10 part better than all of the diviners and enchanters that were in King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Okay. So for every matter of wisdom or knowledge or understanding that they had, it would appear that the King Nebuchadnezzar, used Daniel and his companions frequently. More frequently than even his own enchanters. Which is fascinating to me because that's what the enchanters are supposed to do within the realm of Babylon. They're supposed to give the king wisdom, give him insight, right? Give him some plans, things like that. But he found that essentially Daniel and his companions effectively made these individuals useless, right? It's kind of like go sit down, I got this, right? The second reason is Daniel's understanding within this book, again, appears to be a direct slap in the face of these false gods. Who are the conjurers supposed to, who do they get advice from and wisdom? They get advice and wisdom from these deities. These deities they consult, right? And then they're supposed to inform the king based upon what these deities give them, based upon the powers they have or what has been endowed to them by these false deities. He's not only showing these conjurers and these musicians that they are false, but he's showing their gods to be false too. verse 21, last verse to end the chapter. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. This is very important. This is an important statement here. For one, this is a time marker that Daniel leaves. Again, if you recall, Cyrus is the king of Persia, or was the king of Persia. Okay? He is the one that conquers Nabonidus and Belshazzar. Now, Nabonidus is not mentioned in Scripture, but Belshazzar is mentioned in Daniel 5. Okay? Daniel continues to serve the king personally until this time. Okay? So he still has success under the rulership of Cyrus, but he doesn't serve Cyrus directly. Okay? So Cyrus marks the end of essentially the Babylonian Empire under these individuals, these figures, and the rise of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the king. Another reason why this is important and why Cyrus is mentioned is because the first year of Cyrus's rule marks when Cyrus issues the rebuilding of the temple. This is not recorded in Daniel, but it is recorded in Ezra. Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven," interesting statement, we'll get to that next week, Lord willing, "has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he was appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you all, of all his people, may God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Every survivor, in whatever place he may live, let the men of that place support him with silver and gold, with goods and cattle, together with a free will offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem." This is very important. So Daniel continued to the first year of Cyrus, and ironically so, that is when Cyrus issued the decree. So now we are here on our timeline. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah complete their royal court training, and their names again are changed to reflect the gods of Babylon. We see this, and this occurred since it's 3 years of training. It started in 605 BC. The 3 years is up. They go before the king and present themselves. It is 602 BC at this time. And Daniel is now 19 years of age. Okay. So we see Daniel and his companions are seen as favorable individuals in the kingdom of Babylon by the chiefs of the eunuchs and the king. This first chapter again greases the skids for all the events to follow concerning Nebuchadnezzar and essentially the entire empire of Babylon. Okay. This mega city. So let's go back to our questions and answers for chapter 1. Remember, these are all the questions here from chapter 1 that is found. If you have the notes from a couple of weeks ago. Why does the book begin like this? Well, the book begins like this because this marks the time in Israel's history where they were taken into captivity. This again fulfills what God had said concerning their destiny in the land of Babylon, where they're exiled. What do Daniel and his companions' names mean? That is, their Babylonian names. Their names were changed to emphasize and reflect that they now belong to the Babylonian Empire and to the service of the king, and thus to the gods of the Babylonians, right? Question 3, why was Daniel and his companions denying the food of the king a favorable thing to do? Well, the food was denied. More than likely, it was not aligned with the Mosaic law that Daniel and his companions still honored even in Babylon. Okay? And that made them a unique people. Who is Jehoiakim? Jehoiakim is the third king of Judah who was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar in 605 BC. Right? And the last one is, who is Aku? Again, Aku is the moon god to the Babylonians and was more likely influential in the earlier part of the Babylonian Empire during the time that it was first established as a city. That concludes chapter 1. Lots of good information there. We will enter into chapter 2 with an interesting question I have, and I want to explore that next week. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the information of Daniel and all of the subsequent, just all of this information is just chock full of historical data and lots of good details for us to think about and glean. Thank you, Lord, that this is really about your preservation of Israel in exile to Babylon and how you will fulfill your good word to them, and using the servants, the sons of Israel, to do that. Thank you again so much just for this time. For it's in your son's name. Amen.